we have our own little TIR community, which is basically me, Jason, Kuba, Pascal, Vaughn, C. Derek Vaughn,
Mm,
and then the
huge fans.
Sublation people of
Yeah, yeah.
Angry Vaughn. Oh, good.
Warren, Pascal, Robert Pascal, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, Pascal is currently on a break though because he's quite ill, so he's had to.
Oh,
He's taking some time off to recover. Hopefully, he'll be better in the next few months. His health
oh,
has not been great, so we're all hoping he feels better soon.
I hope he feels good. Oh, let me just so do the quick introduction so we can even keep some of this perhaps in. So I just quickly welcome everybody. It's another interview of It's a Progressive World. It's my pleasure to interview Djene Bajalan, professor of history at Missouri State University and co-host of This is Revolution podcast, who recently penned the article "The Poverty of Anti-imperialism," which you can find on Compact Magazine's websites. We will be discussing the article as well as Middle East history and politics with a little bit focus on Iraq and Iraq war and Syrian nationalism. So sorry, we were
Mhm.
just talking a little bit about your show though, and yeah, it's a very fantastic show, and you recently talked about the article on it as well, right?
Yeah, so on This is Revolution, we decided to talk about an article I wrote for Compact Magazine,
Mm.
which is unfortunately behind a paywall. But if you want to get a copy, you can always just look up my university email me, and I will send you a copy.
Thank
Um,
you.
uh, it is behind a paywall, but I did not have any saying in that. The reason I mentioned that, people have been like, why are you putting it behind a paywall? Or the worst thing is, people have been criticizing me, going, this is a terrible article, but they've only read the first two paragraphs because they can't read the rest
Yeah,
because it's behind a paywall. And then they got mad at me for saying, well, you shouldn't have put it behind a paywall. It's like, I didn't put anything behind a paywall. Anyway, some very weird criticism from people um, who didn't read the entire article because it was behind a paywall, which I understand. Paying for articles is expensive. But what was the article about? So it was about anti-imperialism, and um, it was a kind of response and also a way for me, by writing it, to try and sort out my opinions on the question of anti-imperialism and think more coherently about why certain strands of the left in America particularly annoy me in the way that they dismiss the reasons that people might be protesting in countries. And a good example of this, one of the things that triggered this article, was the response of certain elements on the left to the protests in Iran. And it was, when the protests broke out, I looked online and I predicted, like, sadly, I could see there were certain individuals with quite large followings in left media, and I knew what they were going to say about the protest before anything had really become clear, which was, it is a color revolution, it's a CIA plot, the Islamic Republic is an anti-imperialist regime, and all this kind of thing. No, like, they don't have any information or evidence, just an immediate assumption. And you see this in quite a few places. A similar discourse uh, was deployed regarding the protests in Kazakhstan just before the start of the Ukraine war. There were a series of protests in Iran. A bunch of people on the left were trying to portray this as a color revolution, some kind of Western plot, when it was actually a conflict within Kazakhstan, and not really anything much to do with anybody in the West trying to promote a color revolution. But there's just an assumption on elements of the left that everything that's bad, quote unquote, that happens in the world, or any protest that takes place in a country that is opposed to the United States, like Iran, is somehow a CIA plot or some kind of nefarious conspiracy or what have you. And I found that kind of response problematic, but I wanted to think about, A, where does that come from? Why do people make that assumption? And B, how can we like have a firmer basis of an anti-imperialist politics? And the reason that I feel like the assumption on some elements of the left that anyone opposing the US is a good guy, like Assad is in conflict with the US, he must be the good guy. The Islamic Republic is in conflict with the US, must be the good guy. Putin is in conflict with the US, must be good. I wanted to make the point that you can be anti-imperialist, and you can actually have a firmer basis of anti-imperialist without discussing the character or nature of the regimes that are opposing the United States. And with what I want to say is there may be regimes opposing the United States that are like supportable, right? That we can say, no, this is like, they're not perfect, but these are guys worth supporting. But then there are other regimes that oppose the United States that we don't need to do apologetics for, we don't need to be supporters for. And in fact, we shouldn't try and get into a discussion over whether, for example, the Taliban are actually, good guys because they fought American imperialism, or that Assad is just misunderstood and he protects minority rights. We don't need to do any of that, because ironically, by arguing about the character of the regime, we're actually arguing on the same basis that the imperialists are trying to justify their wars. So, for example, Iraq is a bad regime. They have this, that, and the other. Well, a lot of people opposing the war, rightly, we're trying to debunk this. Like, oh, Iraq doesn't have weapons of mass destruction, etc., etc. My point would be, it's like, that's a good thing to do, to try and debunk lies, but that shouldn't be what you rest your anti-imperialism on, because it really leads to the question, well, what if it turns out those accusations are true? Do you have to concede and accept the rationale for intervention? Or put it another way, a lot of people complain about the Iraq war. They call it an illegal war. It was an illegal war. Well, does it matter? Would it have been okay if like it wasn't an illegal war? Would, like, if the UN, as they did in Libya, signed onto it, would you support the war then? So why are you mentioning that it's illegal war? Because that's not why you're opposing the war. And then you had a whole bunch of people who were going on about Saddam Hussein is this anti-imperialist. He's like this great guy. He's totally misunderstood. It's like, no, Saddam Hussein was not like a great guy. And in fact, he was working quite closely with the Americans, and similar with Gaddafi. Gaddafi was actually, part of the war on terror, and people were getting taken and tortured in Libya. Like, we can accept that we don't have to say he's a good guy to say that, whatever the case, a U.S. intervention is going to make things worse. You might be familiar with some of the discourse around the Iranian diaspora vis-a-vis the protests in Iran. And you have these absolute freaking lunatics who are just saying, like, if you're like, I don't think sanctions on Iran are a good idea, or I don't think military escalation in Iran is a good idea, they're like, oh, you support Islamic Republic. It's like, no, I don't support
Ahmadinejad, you mean? No, you do. You support Islamic. Sorry.
Everybody supports Islamic Republic, who is not taking the most aggressive political line, and it's become quite a toxic field in the West, with like, as a Kurd, I love to see Iranians fighting each other. This is beautiful, but for me, just to swap the roles around, but it becomes a very poisonous discourse. So we don't, to oppose American imperialism, we don't need to run interference or do explanations for the motivations of a country. We can say, for example, I don't think the US and the military industrial complex, or put it another way, we could, if you see like everybody who opposes America as a good guy, you end up with a kind of weird conspiratorial worldview where everything is a CIA plot, which is just a bad analysis, because it really overestimates the competence of the American empire, right? That's number one. And number two, it's kind of a little bit racist, in that it assumes that people, Iranian people, for example, are just dummies, right? And they
Yes,
would
yeah.
only go and protest if, of course, it was a CIA plot. So you kind of end up looking like an idiot. And the problem with that is, to most people, you're not going to convince people like that you're right. You're not going to convince people American empire is a bad thing by saying actually the Islamic Republic is really good and they're the good guys in this conflict. We should oppose American empire regardless of whether or not it of what it's doing, right? Because it's a it's a vast institution that sucks up resources in the United States, that militarizes the society, and that while in some cases I might concede, like some cases, maybe the American military intervention helped some people, saved some lives, stopped something. I don't think many people, for example, would say, well, America should not have been involved in the Second World War to fight the Nazis. So conceivably there is conditions where American military power could be used for good, but that's not the point. The point is that every time that power is used, it deepens the power of the military-industrial conflict. And in the grand scheme of things, even if in a specific case it might help, overall, the cost of American empire, especially in the age of war and terror, has been monumentally high. So that's the argument I'm trying to put forward to. Let's not focus on like Assad's a good guy or like China's done nothing wrong. Let's just focus on opposing American imperialism in and of itself without, buying into the propaganda of the opponents of the United States automatically.
No, I 100% agree. Although I just this kind of ties well to my question regarding U.S. invasion of Iraq, because you talked about it in an interview and you said that at the time you opposed it, but you weren't sure why. And you would see these people who would read the American history of post-World War II and come out and think they can remake the world, blah, blah, blah. So I was just wondering, like in terms of invasion of Iraq, like I was at the time, by the way, a huge supporter, because I Saddam was,
yeah, he was the bad guy.
yeah, he was the bad guy. Yeah, I grew up with Saddam being the main bad guy like every day. So now I know it was completely wrong, but at the time I feel like there was justification to, like, because their thought was that there is gonna be a sort of a Marshall Plan for Middle East,
Right. Yeah,
Was that so unjustified to think that? Was that so out of?
I mean, I think yes. At that point, that was perhaps naive to believe that the United States could do it. Not that there weren't people in the United States administration who had that kind of fantasy. Like the Iraq War was, was not simply about like extracting oil. A lot of so-called Marxists, their version of Marxist is just like follow the money. Everything is to do with like, it's all about money. It's all about economic interest. That's not Marxism. That's just like basic Enlightenment philosophy. You go back to like Adam Smith, and that's, that materialism is not specific to Marxism.
Yes.
And so they misread what the Iraq War was about. It wasn't about the Americans going in and literally stealing the oil. In fact, that's probably why Trump was so mad about the Iraq War, because Trump was like, what do you mean you invaded the country and didn't steal the oil? Wait, isn't that the whole point of invading
It's
the country?
ridiculous. This is what is going on. Why did we go?
Yeah, it's like,
Yeah.
why don't you steal the oil, my friends? What is going
Yes.
on, you idiots? It was part of, there were economic, obviously, motivations, things related to extracting contracts from the US government,
Defense.
the defense contractors. There were grand strategy, things like opening up Iraqi oil in a general sense to counterbalance the Saudis, lots of different factors that were going on in this war. But the issue is ideology and state capacity, right? So at the end of the Second World War, height of New Dealism, all that kind of stuff, there was an infrastructure in the United States to rebuild certain countries, or, to adopt particular policies that would allow the development of particular countries like Japan or Western Europe, et cetera, et cetera. But by the time of the Iraq War, that capacity, that ideological perspective just didn't exist. The Americans weren't going to spend the resources that they needed to build that, and their ideological perceptions of Iraq, of how to govern these countries, precluded them being able to establish an effective colonial administration. Like, the Americans were putting all their eggs in the baskets of this exiled Iraqi groups, the Iraqi National Congress, all these kind of joke people who had no basis on the ground. And when they turn up, they suddenly discover, Ayatollah Sistani and Muqtada al-Sadr are actually the people they'd never heard of, really, or had not accounted what those were the people. So there was not the ideological base, there was not the material base. We're seeing during this period an end to kind of military Keynesianism and the privatization of large parts of the American military. Donald Rumsfeld, was making the case for the war by doing it on the cheap, saying we only have to use this, that, and the other. So the American state was just not, it was going to fail whatever. And to use an analogy, like, think about it like this. If you go on YouTube, you can find like all these alternative history YouTube channels, which are usually pretty bad, right? And one of the favorite things is like, oh, the Nazis could have won in the Soviet Union if they had done this policy, if they'd been nice to the minority groups, if they'd been like, and it's like, well, yeah, but like, the Nazi state was never going to do that, right? Because like, it's structured.
Then they wouldn't be Nazis.
They wouldn't doing the war. And even in like, another good example is Japan and in Manchuria. So when Japan invaded Manchuria, there were a lot of left-oriented people, at least initially, who saw like Manchuria as not like a specifically Japanese nationalist project, but had a kind of utopian vision for a multi-ethnic society of Chinese, Japanese, Russians, Manchus. There was this kind of version of Manchurian state planning, but that fantasy collapsed very quickly. Why? Well, because the main material force behind the conquest of Manchuria was not a bunch of like idealistic intellectuals, but the Japanese military and a very extractive wing of the Japanese military. So yeah, like the fantasy of a utopian multicultural Manchuria was never going to happen, despite the desires of some cadre, because of the material structures of what like Japanese empire was. Think of Japan in another way. Japan made all these critiques, quite rightly, about racist European colonialism in Asia. But when they invaded the Philippines and Indonesia, despite having this good rhetoric, didn't work out well for the Filipinos or the Indonesians, because despite their rhetoric, the Japanese state was based on this militaristic course. So the American state, whatever the desires of some cadre, whatever whatever the fantasies they might have, the material structures of the American state, of how American empire works, the U.S. Army, all these things meant that this was doomed from the beginning, because there was no ideological or institutional or material basis for it to be a success.
No, yeah, fair. I guess it was hard to see it at that time. I feel after 2007, it became really clear. But it was very difficult. But so I guess that was the first question. What has been the so now just moving on, because this is connected to that. What do you think was because already before the invasion of Iraq, Kurdistan was sort of almost independent, from what I understand, because of the no-fly zone and all that. What has been the effect of the invasion and then the civil war in Syria on Kurdish nationalism? Because I guess one of the most prominent argument in nationalism discourse is the Charles Tilly sort of a states makes war and war makes a state. So do you think there is a Kurdish state or states emerging from these wars? Or
I mean, so in terms of, so I would put it this way: when we talk about when we talk about Kurdish nationalism or the Kurdish movement, we often think of it as a unitary nationalism. We think of, there's a thing called Kurdish nationalism, right?
Mm.
But because of the geopolitical situation of the Kurds and the specific history over the last 100 years of the Kurdish population, Kurdish nationalism is both like your typical like minority nationalism, but also has some aspects of pan-Arab nationalism or pan-Turkish nationalism because it's international. It's international as well. And so in each part of Kurdistan, there is a distinct iteration of Kurdish nationalism that has its own history, its own ideological and political orientation, its own specifics, and its own organizational structure, right? So there is, Kurdish nationalists often talk about Bakuri, Bashuri, Rojhalati, Rojavai, like Northern Kurd, Southern Kurd, Eastern Kurd, Western Kurd. But when they say it, it's actually just a reference to which country you live in. If you're if they say
Yeah.
you're Rosh Halati, it means you're from Iran, right? So it's kind of a rejection of the nation state, but also a reification of the nation state at exactly the same time. So you have these different iterations of Kurdish identity in different parts of Kurdistan, but they're all connected to each other as well. So Iranian Kurdish politics is connected to Iran, but it's also connected to the bigger Kurdish question. So they all affect each other in a knock-on way. Even if, for example, a good example of this is the Hizbi Demokrat, the Kurdistan Democratic Party. Kurdistan Democratic Party was founded in Mahabad, right? And the Kurdistan Democratic Party.
My father used to work there.
Oh, in Mahabad.
Very beautiful city. Very cool city. Everybody is very
chill,
relaxed and liberal, and yeah.
Well, Sanandaj is apparently the most liberal. That's
Sanandaj is much more of a city. Mahabad is much more smaller,
So good examples. Kurdistan Democratic Party was founded in Mahabad, and initially they sent a branch to organize in Iraq. But over time, they split into two different organizations. And in fact, they conflict in the early 80s. Iraqi Kurdistan Democratic Party was working with Pasdaran to fight the Iranian Kurdistan Democratic Party. So, each of these, there's Kurdish movements in each part, but yeah, they influence each other. So in Iraq, what we've seen is, after 1991, there's the no-fly zone. And there's, in effect, a kind of Kurdish state, but it's a very precarious existence between 1991 and 2003 for a number of reasons. They're under embargo from Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein's like, okay, you don't want me, I'm not going to pay any salaries, we're cutting off the thing. And also, they're under sanctions from the UN because the region is still part of Iraq and is under UN sanctions. And there's a lot of conflict, especially between the two main parties in the region. But there's a kind of brokered peace between the two parties: the Kurdistan Democratic Party, the Barzani's party, and the Patriotic Union of Kurdistan, the Talabani party. And Talabani's party is more pro-Iran, and KDP is more. The same there. So it was like a bit of a mess in the 90s. But after 2003, a lot of money came into the region, like tons of money. I went to Erbil in 2004, and it was like, nothing had been built since like 1970. It looked, like everything was old. The infrastructure was ruined. The sewerage wasn't there. And, since 2004, it's unrecognizable, right? It's crazy how it changed. Like when I was in 2014, I think it was 2013. Like if you went to Ankawa in Erbil, it would be just full of Iranians coming from coming to get drunk in the nightclubs, right?
Oh yeah,
it was because it was like for the rich
huge
ones they go to. Yeah, if you're rich, you go to the Gulf. If you're poor, you get in a car and you drive to Erbil and get a tattoo. And it was like crazy, like high-rise buildings, nightclubs, all this kind of stuff. Like a little bit like of a kind of rentier economy, but it was a lot of money pouring in and a lot of change taking place quite a lot. So that had a big effect on broader Kurdish consciousness, especially in Iran, right? Because so many Iranian Kurds are crossing into Iraqi Kurdistan. They're all very close. Lots of intermarriage between the side. They speak the same dialect of Kurdish. It's like it's very, very culturally close. And many Iranian Kurds don't like the political leadership in Iraqi Kurdistan. They'll say and they will say Iraqi Kurds have been ruined. The Arabs have been ruining them, and they've become a bit Arab, that kind of stuff. But so there's a kind of like Iranian Kurds have have like, let's say, critiques of Iraqi Kurdistan or Iraqi Kurdish
cultural
culture.
chauvinism, a bit
of cultural chauvinism.
Yeah, it makes sense.
But at the same time, it also kind of partially revived the Kurdish movement after the suppression of the 80s, because a lot of Kurds were like, if these Iraqi Kurds can run themselves, like, we don't need the Persians to run us anymore. We don't need the Ajam and the Kafir and the Rida to come and rule us, So,
I mean, Safavid were Kurds. I like to point that out.
Like they were Turkified Kurds. They were Turkified,
but it's Persians that they're talking about. Persians haven't ruled anybody for like 2,000 years, I think.
Well, I actually was at a Persian concert in London years ago, and somebody there was a Persian singer. I was attending with a friend. I wasn't like really paying attention, but some guy was like sing a song in Turkish. Okay. I think they wanted some ayrılık. The Gugush sings it. Ayrılık.
I know Gugush. I don't know the song.
It's an Azeri Turkish.
I assume if I hear it, I know. But yeah,
you would know it if you heard it. Anyway, somebody shouted, "Call that," and then somebody else shouted, "Donkey Turk," right?
Yeah, sure.
And then suddenly it turned out half these Iranians were Turks, and there was a big fight. It was like it's like welcome to the danger zone, because like. You yelled "Donkey Turk" and everyone got mad, and I was like, "Geez,
it's more than, I would say, more than 60% of Iranians are Turks or Turk related." So,
I mean, yeah, ridiculous. Everybody's mixed. Everybody is mixed in Iran, right?
Yeah,
but so what I was saying, the development in Iraqi Kurdistan, like Iraqi Kurdistan being opened up to the West, like this kind of ability to travel and stuff, was very attractive to a lot of Iranian Kurds and
Iranians in general, I would say.
I'd say Iranians in general.
But the Kurdish nationalism thing is more.
It had an impact on Kurdish nationalism. Now, that being said, I think, while there are some Iranian Kurds who, would like independence, I think even they would mostly be like, if we had some kind of autonomy and self-rule, like that would be fine. That would be fine. We're happy to like compromise on that. Ironically, I find the most counterproductive people who are the other people who are always like, like, we are all Iranians. It's like, guys, like, don't worry about it, right? Just calm down. You're the ones who are going to make people nationalists. They're
provoking a reaction. Yeah, they're provoking. Calm down. Yeah,
it's calm down. It's calm down. It's like one guy got like so mad at me. He's like, "I'm a Kelkhor from Kermanshah. I'm Iran."
Kelkhor, of course.
Yeah, and I'm like, it's okay, bro. You can be Iranian. I'm not saying don't be Iranian or like don't feel like Iranian. You can do whatever you like. You could do your taruf and all that kind of stuff. That's fine. But some people don't feel like that. You don't have to get mad at them. But that's what nationalism is. I think, and so there is a kind of and also what I would say, what I say to my Kurdish friends is always like, bro, like at the end of the day, you're not going to get it's not going to happen. Kurdish state is not going to happen. Geopolitics is what defines who gets a state. The only hope of national rights and emancipation are as part of a pan-Iranian movement. So like trying to do it by yourself, you're just going to get crushed. It's got to be, all together, whether we like it or not, whether you think that's fair or not, or, whatever, that's just the reality of things. But yeah, so, Iranian Kurdish nationalism has been influenced by Iraqi Kurdish nationalism, but also by changes taking place in Iran as well, like internal factors in Iran. They crushed all those opposition people. They assassinated Qasim Lu. They did all kinds of stuff, and and then there was a different generation that went to the Mejlis, in the early 2000s. They didn't get anywhere. They got pushed out. And, the region,
They
it's
got
like, well,
personally rich. Some of them got personally
some
rich.
of them did. Oh, yeah. Some
So
of them got personally rich.
yeah, that's something, I suppose.
Yeah, some of them got very rich. So there's been basically factors in Iran. People are alienated by by whether it's like just the general economic conditions, or like a sense of cultural persecution or religious issues, obviously, those kind of things. So there have been internal demands, but there's also been, the impact of Kurdish nationalism in Iran. More recently, the movement in Syria. Like, where does this Xinjiang Azadi come from? Well, it was developed in Turkey, popularized in the Syrian Kurdish movement, and transferred to Iranian Kurdistan through Iraqi Kurdistan and through the connect groups like Pezhak, which have connections with the Kurdish movement in Turkey and Syria, and then to the Persian community, who adopted it within the context of the protests in Iran. So like this, there's this transnational effect, which in fact in this case goes beyond the Kurdish community, in that this whole PKK style feminism was very very convenient, or perhaps the better word, it was like really fit for the moment that was taking place in Iran. Whatever people think about PKK and that ideology, I think the fact that there was this big shift in emphasis on women, which was something I was like, oh, that's cool, but I never really thought about it. I was like, of course, though, it makes sense, because in the last 40 years in the Middle East, it's been this very conservative push. Well, a focus on women's rights, like, draws like 50% of the population who are angry at the state of affairs into a particular struggle. So the war in Syria obviously had an impact. Developments in Turkey had an impact. So they all affect each other over the last 40 years.
Do you think now that Assad is being brought, like, will come back to Arab League and stuff, the Kurdish independent sort of areas have any chance, or are they going to be run over soon?
That's like a really good question. We actually did a show on this with Alex Makiva the other week, about which we tackled this. He's a journalist who works on Syria, and we were discussing what the fate is, and it's a very difficult one to say, because the Kurdish movement in Syria and the Assad government are frenemies. So they're not exactly enemies, but they're not exactly friends either. Like, the reason that the pro PKK group in Syria was able to take over during the Syrian civil war was because the Syrian government had traditionally allowed them to organize. Many Syrian Kurds basically were kind of allowed to join the PKK or its affiliate organizations in Syria, so long as they went to fight in Turkey, right? Syria supported the PKK against Turkey for a number of geopolitical reasons, especially during the 80s, right up to the 90s, until Turkey was like, we're going to invade you if you don't get rid of the PKK, right? So Syria intelligence had strong connections with these groups. And when the civil war happened, the Syrian army and the Syrian security forces were in a tight situation, so they withdrew from these areas and left them to the Kurdish groups to run for themselves, right? So there is a long history of cooperation, but the Syrian government does not want to formalize any concessions to them, right? So the Syrian Kurds are have been periodically negotiating with Assad, talk about like, well, can we have like a language autonomy, blah blah, this kind of thing. And the Syrian government don't want to concede anything, because they don't feel they have to. They feel like eventually,
not even Not even like they don't want to do it within existing status structures. I thought they just don't want to like make a separate as like a autonomous region thing, but they don't
Well,
even concede language like things.
yeah, I mean, not even that. There's been, yeah, not even the language. Some of the language stuff
Because even
has been
Islamic Republic,
conceded.
so
I mean, yeah, the
concedes that.
Islamic Republic, the Islamic Republic is a little different in that, like, technically you're allowed to do things, but practically you aren't allowed to do things. As my wife used to say, goes, look, in Iran you have freedom of speech, but when you say
You don't
the
have.
thing or write the thing, you get arrested. You get arrested the next day.
No,
But we
it's
let you say it.
you
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 got
don't
to
have
say it.
freedom after speech. You have freedom.
Exactly. That's a different thing. Yeah. In Iran, obviously, uh, technically there are all these there's a constitutional recognition of tribal and minority languages. This is in the constitution. There is University of Kurdistan in Sanandaj, which has like Kurdology departments and things like that. But on the flip side, if you're in
There's no
Urmia and you
money
want to
for
put
it, so
there's no money. But if you are a business in Urmia or in Mahabad, and you want to have a sign in Kurdish, they're like, no, you can't have a sign in Kurdish, right?
oh
Uh,
yeah, that's true.
or
Yeah.
like it's like very arbitrary as well. It's like
Mm.
sometimes you'll be allowed to give your kid a Kurdish name, right? Sometimes
Yeah.
though, you won't be allowed to give them a Kurdish name, right? Or for example, it depends. If you have like a very Shia type of guy registering the name, they're like, no, you have to give them a good Muslim name. If it's a pan-Iranian guy, he go, oh, Kurd is our brother. It's good. That kind
Two
of thing.
Aryan name,
So
it's okay.
it's Aryan name, exactly. It depends what kind of Iranian nationalist they are.
Yeah.
If it's Azeri, definitely no Kurdish, 100%. But if it's some like fancy like pan-Aryan guy, he's like, oh, Kurd is original Persian, original Iranian person. So like it's arbitrary in Iran. Like
I'm yes, very surprised Syria is. I didn't know they're that harsh that they don't concede any.
it's the Syrian Arab Republic. People forget that it's the Syrian Arab
Yes,
Republic.
that's well, I mean, Baathist. I mean, if different kind of
So
Baathist. Yeah.
so yeah, in the negotiations, the Syrian government has been very unwilling to concede anything substantive or long term, right?
Mm.
And and they aren't really impelled to at the moment. So what's keeping the Kurdish region alive is literally the support of the United States, and the United States is there, but it doesn't really have a long term plan. If you read all these like pro-Baathist people or like these like American anti-imperialists, they're like, America's there to steal the oil. It's like, guys, like there's like very shitty oil in Syria, right? And
The
that
cost
oil,
of pulling it out, it's just come on.
it's shitty oil that they smuggle to Turkey and get refined, right? It's not like, a big American company's like, oh, now we've got the freaking no. In fact, my whole theory was like, for geopolitical reasons, when Trump tried to pull out of Syria, they were like, oh crap, this is going to mess up our geopolitics. So what did they say? Hey, Trump, there's some oil in Syria. If you go, you're going to leave the oil. And he was like, oh no, we got to keep the oil. So they like trick Trump into, because a lot of people, a lot of vulgar Marxists will be like, look at the Americans were in Afghanistan because look, in 2011, look at this report. It says there's all these minerals under Afghanistan,
Yeah.
right? And my friend on TII Deep State, Kuba, who's worked for the deep state, he's like, no, man, like you're getting it wrong. The reason they're talking about those minerals is to try and convince people to stay there. Not that there's actually any minerals. They're like saying, no, you got to stay because this is trying to appeal to people's greed. So sometimes like the economic rationale is being used to try and convince a politician to do a policy which is part of their like grand imperial strategy. So in Syria, the Kurdish like autonomous region is really on life support of the United States. And a lot of leftists are like, well, they took the support of the United States, blah, 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 blah. It's like, yeah, they took the support of the United States to fight ISIS. Like when ISIS is coming, are you going to tell people it's like, no, you have to be anti-imperialist. Don't take the Americans' gun. ISIS is coming.
Their money is, I don't want to touch it. I don't know. Thank you.
They're just
no, thank you.
misunderstood. They're just misunderstood. ISIS, they are misunderstood, my friend. It's all the kuffars lies. The ISIS are very nice people. This isn't a rape camp. This is a This is a family camp where
It's a
we
very
force
hard negotiation style they
uh,
have.
it's
That's how they, yeah, that's their
it
style.
just yeah. So you know, people it's
Yeah.
I just always find it funny when you find people like the Syrian Kurds took American weapons. Like, yeah, in the context of the fight against ISIS, are you telling them to surrender to ISIS? You want to surrender to? I mean, if there's one guy you don't surrender to, it's ISIS, because it's never going to work out well for you. Well, especially for you guys, you know.
Yes, yeah. I mean, especially for us, but I don't think for anyone. And yeah, yeah, I mean, it's also very lacking in any common sense in terms of what else they gonna like. Put yourself in their position, even if it's not a principal act to take money
Yeah.
from. Like like they don't
When
yeah, there is not other resources for money. Is not
I
that
mean,
many
when
at least.
Iran when Iran took weapons from the Great Satan in the
Iran
80s,
Contra affair.
yeah, exactly.
That's the hilarious thing that, yeah, they forget about the Reagan they hate. Reagan is hateful, but the other side that took the deal, nah, he's cool. He was anti-imperial. Khomeini was amazing. Yeah,
But of
yeah.
course, and also from that perspective, like at the end of the day, you know, I totally get why the Iranians took America for weapons from the Great Satan. Why wouldn't they?
Yeah. I mean,
Like Saddam is invading your country. You take the weapons you get.
and they're all politicians. I think at the end of the line, they're very corrupt, and I feel like to
Yeah.
put too much idealism, like they're not journalists or activists, you know. They're
Well, I mean that's what's happened to the Islamic Republic, though, isn't it? You know, like it's all money now, right? And
yeah,
it's all
yeah.
like the mullahs aren't in charge anymore. It's the Pasnadan, and they have the companies. They have all the. I mean, like the
It's
balance of
not
power.
quiet. I would say they somehow weirdly there is a still loyalty to the among the crazy people who believe in Islamic Republic. There is loyalty to the ideology, like the 10% that is still, which I find weird because I would have expected a coup d'etat by now, but
But
somehow.
yeah, I mean, but there's a whole bunch of economic imperatives. Like even sanctions. There are people in Iran
Oh,
who are making
that's great.
great money on sanctions.
Oh yeah, it's been great
I
for
mean, like it's the best.
Sepah. Yeah.
Yeah, they've been. I mean, if you get cheap dollars in Iran, everybody else doesn't get them, so you can buy everything up, right? So it's like all these people love sanctions. You know, it's like
And who, I mean,
so
Iran
we have.
is very, you
You could,
go to shops and you buy very high-end smuggled goods, clearly not smuggled by some, random person in their luggage. It's like,
yeah, it's
yeah,
like
yeah, somebody's doing that. Somebody's, yeah.
I mean, it's a racket. They like I know for a fact
Mm.
that they're going. You know, like you have the Revolutionary Guards all over Suleimania in Iraq, right?
Oh yeah,
They go
yeah,
to Suleimania and they buy everything and they just take it in that lorry and sell it in Iran, and that's
yeah.
how. So you know, like, but that's anti-imperialism, buddy. It's like
Yes,
that's
exactly. That's what I tell my customers every day, and they tell me, no, you're a bad person. But no,
you're a
it's
bad.
anti-imperial.
It's anti-imperialism. Exactly. It's anti-imperialism. I mean,
So
like,
you're
yeah.
sorry.
So a lot of people in the West want are like just get while they sit comfortably having a good life, they're like watching the Iranians like suffer under sanctions, but they're like, it's good though. They're resisting. It's like, yeah,
You
like
can do
you
it.
know,
Go ahead.
you
Yeah,
can do it. You can do
yeah.
it. It's like, and most Iranians like, look, man, America
We
may suck,
can't
but
do
that's
it. We can't do it. Yeah. Oh,
you
yeah.
know that it's like America may suck, but that's not my main problem at the moment, right? You know, my main problem is not American imperialism. It's the fact that, you know, I'm getting squeezed by the police, or like there's inflation and the economy's crap and I don't have connections. I don't get to go around in North Tehran with my Ferrari and take pictures of myself. It sucks, right?
Well,
Like a
yeah.
lot of my friends, like after like people I know in Iran, like one of my good
Mm.
friends, her sister, she had a good job. Suddenly, sanctions, nothing. She has like, you know,
Oh, yeah.
lost a
Right
job,
here.
sits in her parents, now stuck at podcasting.
Yes. Well, I still have my teaching job, but yeah, I
Yeah,
had a good consulting job before Trump pulled out. Yeah, it was
yeah.
such a shame. But I mean, talking of anti-imperialism, what do you think of the recent Turkish elections and Erdogan? Because he's another person because I remember exactly when for 2 minutes he was courting Putin. A lot of people were like, "Oh, Erdogan is he's a anti-imperialist hero, and they're trying to destabilize him." What do you think of
Well,
his?
what I would say,
Mm.
well, what I would say about Turkey and anti-imperialism is that, look, Iran does, like, to a certain degree, is actually paying a cost for doing an anti-imperialism. Like, they pissed off America, and now, like, they suck it up. Turkey, on the other hand, is fully integrated in NATO, the Western economic systems, and then, like, Erdogan just every so often, like, for the dumb, like,
Tweets
conservatives,
like
for
something,
the
yeah.
like for all these idiots across the Middle East and in Pakistan especially, there's like so many Erdogan lovers. He's like says something like America is like bad, or like Israel is bad. Meanwhile, he's doing business
Doing
with
deals
Israel,
with them, yeah.
doing deals and everything.
Yeah, CIA is running rat lines through
Through,
Turkey. It's
yeah,
fascinating, yeah.
and the Turkish intelligence service is giving the CIA information, but they're talking a good game, but they're what is it you say in Persian? Duhru, like two-faced.
Two-faced, yeah. Well, I
Two.
mean, I have to, I mean, I do admire. I do think he's a capable politician, though. Like as it
Oh, he's
like
a very
because
capable politician.
these days it's so hard to find a technocrat. I find so. I think in that sense,
So, well, the thing with Erdogan is this. I'll make this point. Number one, I think some people see this endpoint that we're at in Turkey, this kind of authoritarian turn, and say that was always the plan. I think that's not quite true. I think over time, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely, and Erdogan has kind of gone like bonkers on that. But what I think the AKP is really good at, and what Erdogan was really good at, is less policy per se and more judging the winds of international politics and Turkish public opinion and political maneuvering, right? Like, he's like very adept, and he's also like profoundly unprincipled and profoundly he's profoundly unprincipled, which may sound like I'm doing like a diss on him. It's actually one of his like strengths, because it's allowed him to navigate and change. He's not locked into an ideology, like a firm set of
principled
ideology.
in a political ideology sense, not
Yeah, he
necessarily like he's a bad, doesn't pay the bills.
he doesn't pay. He doesn't pay. That's yeah. He doesn't have like any fixed position, and has shifted. So early Erdogan was like a liberalizing reformer. Later Erdogan is like a tough, strong man leading big Turkey and doing this kind of thing. Now, the early success of the AKP, in my opinion, was they were lucky, right? So in the late 90s and early 2000s, there was a big economic crisis in Turkey. This guy called Kemal Dervish, who just died, actually, economist.
Really?
They did these very painful restructuring reforms. There was hyperinflation. It was like a bad economic time, but they did the reforms, and then just as AKP was elected, they begin to see that the growth, right? So they kind of
Well, the
like
commodity prices globally goes up as well, which really helps.
commodity price, and there's a whole other a bunch of things, like with these neoliberal reforms in Turkey. What Turkey does is there's a kind of stealth Keynesianism, which is done through construction. So like people are given cheap credit to do, people are given cheap credit to build houses, and there's this huge construction boom, right? So the AKP benefit from these kind of neoliberal reforms, and they come into office, and basically because of an accident, because of the nature of the Turkish electoral system, despite only getting, I think, 35% of the vote, they get a huge majority in the parliament. The Turkish system, they have the 10% threshold. So if you don't get more than 10%, you don't get representation. And in this election, by complete accident, only two parties got over 10%. So AKP coming after a decade where it's like coalition governments, everybody's fighting. Suddenly you have one government. You have Erdogan, who was actually initially banned from politics, returns to politics, become prime minister. And then able to like have this kind of stable government, and some of the fruits of neoliberalism, are spread to their constituency, whether it's through cheap housing to poor people or delivering sacks of coal, good old fashioned, bread and butter politics. And the AKP focus on, like there were some flirtations with conservatism. Like initially Erdogan was like, there was proposals about banning adultery, but we all know
Banning adult in Turkey, really? Okay,
in
yeah,
Turkey.
that's
What
why
are you saying
Iranians
about
go there. What do you mean? Like,
for some
that's
adultery?
well, that's a common
For
touristic
fail-
cause.
faaliyeti mustashan, like the
Oh,
pornographic activities,
yeah, I
that
see.
take place in there. Well, Turkey did have a large porno industry.
Yeah, well, it's
Well,
a
don't
shame. It's a sh not that I know anything about it, but it's a
exactly.
shame that it went away.
They, there used to be an Iranian porno industry. Actually,
Was there?
um, I met, well, actually, a friend of mine who was Iranian. Her mother had been a porn star during the Shah's days. They said she was an actor, and then it was like, yeah, the actor in what though? I was like, oh,
To be
oh,
is that but the thing is though, there was a lot of, they called them film farsi, which was based on Indian style movies, the Bollywood
uh-huh.
style of dancing, and a lot of people call that, the conservatives call that pornographic. But they're mostly like they just showing some legs. So I
Oh,
don't know. It could be just that,
it could be who knows who
Yeah.
knows. But and so you have this like liberal phase in
Mm,
Turkey where the AKP focus on a couple of things, right? So there is a cultural issue that they have, which is this issue of the headscarf in the university.
mhm.
Uh,
Yes, yeah, a
the
big headscarf in public places,
in
public
public
government.
places,
Mm,
there had been an MP in the 90s, for example, who had a headscarf, and she was like bullied in the parliament, right?
yeah.
Headscarf women weren't allowed on the university campus. And this was a cultural issue. It's also a class issue because
Mhm.
it's like, the rural, the dehatis coming to the city and making it
The
look all
villagers, so-called.
yeah, all these like köylü, as they call them in Turkey,
Mm,
from Tashra, which is a kind of derogatory term for like the the provinces. So you
mm.
had this kind of like metropole versus a periphery culture war dynamic taking place. But AKP were like, we're going to do liberalizing reforms in the political system, get rid of the tutelage of the military, enhance democracy, and they used the EU accession process as partially for justification for this. And also they focused on like their electoral campaigns. I remember as late as 2012, we're focusing on like, we built these hospitals, like we built this infrastructure. So they're very good at doing this. The opposition, the Kemalists, the old, secular nationalist guard, for the first 10 years of AKP, we're just crying about like, Ataturk was secular. Oh, the republic is under threat. They had these Cumhuriyet meetings where all these like people would come with
Culture
posters of,
wars at their
yeah,
best.
culture. And this doesn't get anywhere. Like the leader of the party, Denis Baykal, kept losing elections, and he was only removed from the party because they got a video of him cheating on his wife. So
Oh wow, I didn't know. That's okay. And
Dennis,
Turkish
yeah,
politics
then
is much more interesting than I thought. I have to look into it.
no, I'm sure Iranian politics is just as interesting,
It's
but it's
not
all like
as much
behind.
sex scandals. We don't have as many. It seems at least.
I don't know about that. Have you been to Qom?
Yeah, you're right. A lot of homosexual sex scandals, not so much
A lot.
heterosexual.
Yeah, exactly. Still a sex scandal.
It's still a sex scandal. Yeah,
It's still a
equal.
sex.
Yeah,
Uh,
no
uh,
matter
uh,
what. Yeah.
so you had this kind of bread and butter focus, and you had this like ineffective opposition that was constantly fighting a
Is
culture war.
Kiliktökçlü, the Kemal Kiliktökçlü, is he in that mold? Is he in the mold of old Kemalist or?
He's like, I would say he's definitely a more modernized version of the Kemalist. So they still have like the kind of romanticized picture of the Kemalist era, but he's more like liberal. He's a little bit more the Kemalist side of politics, the Republican People's Party, the CHP, uh, is a bit of a weird political formation. It was initially a kind of statist party, which had both, which, under Mustafa Kemal, it was the one party state party. And it had within it a kind of left-wing faction that was kind of social democratic. There's a movement called the Cadre movement. So it was a kind of left version of Kemalism. And then there was a pro-fascist version of Kemalism as well. So Mustafa Kemal was often balancing between the kind of left, liberal, and fascistic elements within this party. Now, in the 70s, there was a political leader called Bülent Ecevit, who basically took over the Republican People's Party and explicitly tried to turn it into a social democratic party, right? So CHP is both a kind of nationalist party, has a strong nationalist dimension to it, but also has a kind of quote unquote moderate social democratic element to it. And I think Kılıçdaroğlu is very much more on that kind of we're social democrats, we're moderate social democrats kind of politics, as opposed to the more Atatürkçü nationalist style, but still nationalist, but the balance is a little bit more shifted. And
yeah,
go
I
ahead.
was surprised that he said that his plans to expel the Syrian refugees was harsher than of Erdogan. That's why I kind of asked that.
Yeah. Well, one of the things, put it this way, let's look at the Turkish elections from a Kurdish perspective, right? Because when Kurdish people look at the elections, they're like, well, we might vote for the Kılıçdaroğlu because Erdogan is the guy in power and we're not happy with him. But there is a lot of, let's say, difficulty for some to accept that, because Turkish nationalism, the difference between Erdogan and Kılıçdaroğlu from a Kurdish perspective is just different flavors of nationalism, right? It's you have a more Islamic version of nationalism.
And Islamic version has been nicer, you could argue, overall.
Yes. I mean, at least
recent.
There's kind of contradictions in it. On one hand, there's been a recognition of Kurdish cultural rights, which is unprecedented in Turkey. Still not great, but unprecedented. But at the same time, there's been intensification of violence. It's actually the same dynamic in Iraq. Iraq recognized Kurdish national rights from the beginning of the formation of the state of Iraq. Saddam Hussein established a Kurdish autonomous region, and there were Kurdish language schools and everything. But also they murdered 150,000 Kurds and 150,000 villages as well. So it's
Jesus Christ, yeah.
You get some cultural rights, but also you get massacred. So it's on the AKP can make some claims, but there are also some counterclaims to that. Now, of course, you have Kılıçdaroğlu, and one of his allies is Meral Akşener, who is the leader of the E Party, the Good Party. And the E Party is basically a split from the Fascist Party. The National Action Party, MHP, is allied with Erdogan. After 2015, they became allies with Erdogan. And Akşener, basically, there was a factional fight inside the E Party. The leader, Devlet Bahçeli, he's an old dude, typical Middle Eastern leader, doesn't want to leave the office. She wanted to become leader. Didn't work out for her. She set her new party up and is in the opposition. But she's a fascist still, right? She still comes out of a Turkish fascist tradition. So, it shouldn't be surprising that both the AKP and the Republican People's Party, the opposition party, in a kind of election competition to get rid of Syrian refugees, because both of these wings of Turkish politics are articulating a nationalist politics, trying to win a nationalist vote. And a big issue for many Turks is Syrian refugees. Syrian refugees, there are millions in Turkey. They came in a short period of time. The EU basically bribed Turkey to keep them all in Turkey. And Erdogan used them as a source of cheap labor for a lot of these big projects that the AKP were doing. It's not like they were doing it purely out the goodness of their heart.
Oh, of course.
So, but now there's economic crisis in Turkey. There's, a cultural conflict in Turkey. So there's a desire to get rid of these Syrian refugees and repatriate them. For example, one of the reasons that I don't think we'll see a kind of, for example, Turkey stops supporting the Syrian opposition in Idlib province. One of the reasons I don't think we'll see that right now is not because Turkey doesn't want to make peace with Assad per se. I think they do want to come to some kind of agreement with Assad, but if they let Assad reoccupy Idlib province, what's going to happen to all those Syrians who don't want to live under Assad? They're all going to go to Turkey, right? So Erdogan, kind of, I think, wants to freeze the conflict, and both sides in politics want to find a way to start, quote unquote, repatriating Syrian refugees to Syria. So there is a kind of competition. There's a very marginal politician called Ümit Özdağ in Turkey. He's like a hard right guy, and like his anti-Syrian discourse, although he is kind of politically marginal, a lot of his discourse is kind of seeped into the mainstream.
Oh yeah,
so he's like the Turkish Nigel Farage.
The rumors, my friends and family, some of them live in Turkey, and like they say, Erdogan is giving passport to Syrians to vote in elections. Type of things you see here, very similar things about Mexicans in America and blacks in other countries. It's I feel like it feels very toxic. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, like one of the critiques, one of the critiques of the AKP, I remember early on, in these protests against Erdogan, was that they called it the Arab Kürt Partisi, the Arab Kurd Party, the Arab Kurd, because they were like,
because
these are
they
all
were
like,
a bit
because like some of their members were Kurdish and some of their members were, Arab origin people in Turkey. There are quite a few
Arab origins.
Arab origin people in Turkey. So there was this kind of perception that they're not really Turks. They're kind of like these dark Middle Eastern people who are conquering our progressive modern Turkey that Atatürk made.
Yes.
We can wear miniskirt in Turkey.
It's very important. Okay, it's
very
more important than food.
Exactly.
A lot of people in Europe don't appreciate this, but it is.
Exactly. So there was this whole there's a whole kind of culture war that take place. So Erdogan is protean. He had his liberal phase, and then when you had the global economic crisis, when you had growing discontent about the situation in Turkey, there was this like gradual shift towards a more state capitalism, for example, like more direct government kind of intervention into the economy. You had increasingly draconian policies towards opposition, and and like in many Middle Eastern countries, you see the most sharp oppression taking place in Kurdistan initially, and then going to the rest of the country. The one thing I always say to people in the Middle East, I say, always watch Kurdistan. You don't have to like Kurds, because what's the states doing in Kurdistan today? They're going to be doing to you tomorrow. This is the practice.
Testing grounds. That's what
it's the testing, as they say say in Turkish, istibdad giden yolu Kürdistan'dan geçer. The road to tyranny, rayi istibad Kurdistan. I don't know how you guys would say it in Persian.
All right.
But yeah, that's how you get to the tyranny, is you go through Kurdistan. Islamic Republic did it. All this. They did all the repression in Kurdistan, and then they shot everybody in Tehran afterwards. So we begin to see a ramping up of the Kurdish war after some, kind of attempts at peace. And then we see a more general repression, especially after the coup, where there's a huge purge of everything. So Turkey, Erdogan goes from this kind of liberal guy, reformer guy, moderate Islamist, I'm a liberal, and to a nationalist and like when in the first phase of Erdogan, he had support from large numbers of Kurds, many liberals, some leftists, who they might not have agreed with everything of Erdogan, but they saw like, well, he's pushing democracy forwards. Between about 2012 and 2015 and 2016, we see this shift where he, dumps the liberals, dumps the Kurds, and doubles down instead, bringing back nationalists, including some nationalists that he'd actually put in jail earlier for doing like coups. He brings
That's
like
very
these
common in Middle East. That's a very
so,
common move. Yeah.
so Erdogan is like he kind of judged the moment. Like in 2015, right? Erdogan's party lost the majority in the parliament, right? And it lost the majority for two reasons. The pro-Kurdish party increased its vote, right? On one hand, and the Nationalist Party increased its vote on the other hand, right? So Erdogan was kind of like the Kurds weren't voting for him despite the kind of opening, and he was pissing off the nationalists by being seen as soft on the Kurds and losing votes there. So he flipped it around. He was like, ramp up the Kurdish war and then bring the nationalists in. So he made a coalition with the men.
Sorry, you cut off after you said that he pivoted to bring in the nationalists.
Yeah, so he pivoted. He pivoted to bring in the nationalists in. He brought the MHP into government. He brought. There was this scandal, the Ergenekon cases, where a bunch of military officers and right-wing people had been imprisoned on the grounds that had been trying to orchestrate the overthrow of the government. He brought some of these people back. He brought some of the nationalists back, and really, actually, during this period, doubled down on culture war stuff. Like turning the Hagia Sophia into a mosque again, and changing the name of the country to Turkey, doing all this kind of stuff. And of course, so basically was able to, shift the balance of power in Turkey. But also, since that time, Turkey has had a lot of problems. There was the coup d'etat, attempted coup. After that, Erdogan forced through a constitutional change that enhanced him as president. But he's losing support. He still has a lot of support, but there are a lot of problems. Economic problems, inflation. There are all kinds of scandals. For example, drug scandals, mafia scandals. There was a mafia leader with close connections to the Turkish Minister of Interior, who was basically went to the Gulf and started just telling like all the things that was like pretty funny
he
stuff.
was on YouTube. Yes,
he was on YouTube. He was on YouTube.
Yeah.
He was YouTube saying like what we did, this kind of stuff. There, and then of course, people have long known about the problems in the construction sector. I was
the
watching.
Earthquake kind of revealed that to him.
Yes, I mean, seismologists have been talking about this a long time. There are people on record who've been criticizing this, but a lot of construction is a kind of Wild West industry. There's a lot of construction firms with close connections to the government, and they cut corners in many places. And a lot of people ignored this because buildings were getting built, people were getting houses, it looked good, development was thing, but the infrastructure was shoddy. And when the earthquake hit, so many of these buildings fell down and so many people were killed. And it was, the death toll was unnecessary because there had been in 1999, after the Düzce earthquake, there had been a whole raft of reforms to try and improve earthquake preparedness in Turkey. But these were just basically skirted around. The money that had been set aside for earthquake protection was apparently misspent. And the government's response to the crisis was less to try and help people initially, but to control the narrative. Erdogan was angry about people tweeting things and things that made the government look bad, and so Erdogan's popularity, I think, like, for example, I think Erdogan could legitimately and fairly still win an election in Turkey. It's totally possible, right? There are people who are diehard loyal to him. He has a big mobilization pace. There's a lot of people who buy into his ideology, a lot of people who materially benefited and are grateful. to the AKP. I'm grateful to the leader for the changes. But there is a growing cohort of people who are completely fed up of AKP government after this long period of time. And it's really going to be a question of, it's going to be let me put it another way. I don't dare make any predictions about how this election could go because there are so many unknown factors. AKP has never really had to deal, put it another way. The last time AKP, suffered a major defeat in 2015, they basically refused to accept it and kind of did things to basically force a rerun of the election where they could again get back control, right? Now, this is even more high stakes because the question is, will Erdogan win an election to be president or not? He hasn't lost an election yet, right? And he's been in power for a long time. So one question we might ask is like, well, even if he does lose, would he leave office? Would they allow the election to be free and fair enough? And that's a question I'm very skeptical that they would be willing to do this because after being in power for so long and after persecuting their opponents so much in recent years, if they lose power, what's going to happen to them? They are going to be at risk of being persecuted and put in jail. So there's that. But on the flip side, Turkey does have a relatively strong civil society. It has, people who are determined. There's a saying about Turkey: Turkish elections may not be fair, but they're still free. There's still like an integrity at the ballot box. So there could be a possibility that the opposition could win the presidency. Kılıçdaroğlu could become president. But if I was going to gamble, I would gamble on. I would probably put my money on Erdogan to stay in office because I think there are so many incentives for them not to accept or allow a fully free and fair election. And as you know, you don't have to rig the entire election. This is like when North Korea does this election where it's like they get 99 That's like, guys, why are you wasting your time?
It's
it's
ridiculous.
You just have to rig a little bit and then go to a few select places, right?
Or don't go to a select few places. That's another option.
Or don't, yeah, exactly. Or don't. I mean, this is why the Ahmadinejad election in 2009 was so controversial. Was not that people believed that the entire election had been rigged, but that there'd been this intervention at just the right amount to flip it in Ahmadinejad's favor,
Yeah, and I mean, that one was a weird one because he won in weird cities where, like the city in Azerbaijan where the other guy was from. So, which was odd, that, that's
it was fishy. It was like
yeah.
The election looked normal, and then suddenly there were like these places that made no sense.
Oh yeah.
But that's how you rig an election. If you're smart, you just rig one or two places
instead of professional, like
if
the
you're
Islamic Republic is.
Yeah, the Islamic Republic is professional.
I hesitate to say that, but they are more professional than Soviet Union. I would say that had like 110% turnout, I think. But
yeah,
just to I think I already had 1 hour of your time, but just to finish off, I had two more questions. One which was anything in politics that caught your eye, and another one was anything in pop culture that caught your eye. And I don't know if you have time to answer both, however you prefer. Any recent developments, anything, yeah.
In politics?
Tucker Carlson leaving, King Charles III.
Well, I'll tell you about, I'll give you my Tucker Carlson take. So,
sure.
some of my lefty friends, most of my lefty friends are like, screw Tucker Carlson. And then there are some people who are like, well, Tucker Carlson was the only person who was like allowing this thing. So it said, my point is going to be like, well, I don't criticize anyone for going on Tucker Carlson's program. People like, oh, you're fascist if you go on Tucker Carlson. No, I don't have an issue with that. But I also don't care that Tucker Carlson lost a job, because to me, cable news is just stupid, right? Like, it's a joke. It's comedy. And so I just find it
It's
funny that Tucker Carlson lost his job, and I think he's going to get another job. And I think people,
oh, he
if you,
got one. He's
oh, he
Elon
got one
Musk.
now.
Yeah,
Oh, he's
Elon
got
Musk Twitter
give.
apparently. Yeah, he's gonna sue Fox News for um divulging person, I don't know, personal information, something like that. But yeah, Elon Musk bought him, so that's
Oh,
everybody.
that's good. That's good to know. That's good to know.
Yes,
Elon Musk got
in his
himself a
sleep
pet.
happiness.
Because Tucker Carlson is really a grotesque person because he is truly an opportunist, uh, and he goes with the wind. Like he was like a neocon kind of guy for a while, and then he was like the sensible. He was like, we have to be like truth, and now he just went full like, let's go like some
Have
of the
you seen a
leftists.
Starship Troopers?
Of course,
Oh,
yeah.
his character is based on the conservative guy in that, right? Because he
Oh
had
yeah,
the
the
bow
one who
tie.
bow tie. Yeah, exactly. He is. He is
He's a
definitely.
cartoon character. He's a Starship Troopers guy. I
He's
feel
an
like.
actor. He's a news actor, just like most of these people are news actors on cable news. I listen to a lot of cable news on my
Mm.
radio because nobody else at This Is Revolution will listen to it, and we have to know what the libs are saying and the conservatives are saying.
Division
So
of
I listen.
labor. This is division.
It's a division of labor. So it's all very superficial analysis, and Tucker Carlson, um, had people who are critics of the war in the Ukraine, of American policy in Ukraine, which is fine. I think, not enough of those voices are
Glad that
on.
happened. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. That's great. But also he's been egging on war with China. It's like so many of these dummy anti-imperialists just missed the point, right? That it's like Mersheimer, who everybody was like,
Yeah.
Mersheimer. It's like
The realist
Mersheimer's,
international relations.
yep,
Yeah,
it's got a right
professor.
wing, a right wing could say, and who are like, look, he shows exactly this is America's fault. It's like, do you guys not realize this guy is like saying this because he wants us to focus on killing Chinese people and not our fellow white, you know,
Or yeah, it's like the difference between Kissinger and Dick Cheney. It's like
exactly. It's like
yeah, yes, sure. One is a slightly better, like it's more like not even better.
it's just that they
One
have
is
a
more.
different approach. They have a
Yes,
different
exactly. Yeah,
they have
yeah,
a
yeah.
different approach, and they have
Depending on
uh,
where you stand. Yeah, yeah.
look, realism. Like realism was the notion, like, and there are different versions of realism, liberal realism, more conservative versions of realism. But
E.H. Carr, Marxist realism.
yeah, there's Marxist realism, and it comes down to, as expressed in American foreign policy, particularly in the 60s and 70s, particularly by Kissinger, was just the notion that there are great powers in the world. We have a sphere of influence, which means we're going to go murder a Chilean leader, whether you like it or not, because that's our sphere of influence. But at the same time, you can do what you like in your,
In your
we're not going
backyard.
in your bag. And there was a kind of, and that's an old paradigm, like during the early modern period, when Spain and the Ottoman Empire were fighting over the Mediterranean, every so often you'd have a Christian from the Balkans going to Spain saying, hey, can you help me do an uprising? Or you'd have a Moor from Andalusia coming to the Ottomans and can you help me? And they'd be like, we're very sympathetic, but we're not going to mess in.
Not good time right now. Okay.
Not good time right now. That's not. We've got so there's a kind of realism. And that realism is predicated on the idea of there are big countries in the world and there are countries that can suck it up in the world, right? Which I don't see how that is like anything related to left-wing politics or egalitarianism. It's just like, Russia gets to do what it wants to its neighbors because Russia is big and we have to respect big.
I respect that in terms of analysis. I just don't respect that in terms, like, you know what I mean? Like, I can understand that as analysis.
Yeah,
I just don't
there is.
understand as a goal. Like, it
Yeah,
is what it is, but yeah.
I think that's an important distinction. We can say, like, I think people mix up the argument. We can say certain actions of the United States created conditions in which Russia, and it was Russia and Putin at the end of the day,
That invaded, but
escalate
it was,
that,
yeah.
Escalated the conflict. If you want to say it's been ongoing, well, escalated it to a new phase. We can say that without saying, and we can say Russia had, let's say, like rational reasons or reasons that we can explain, right? but that doesn't mean we have to agree with them or that we have to sympathize. And that's explaining, right? It's
I
like,
think it's a good thing. We're happy.
yeah, well,
It's a
it's
jolly.
like, well,
Yeah. Oh,
it's like saying like,
yeah.
well, it's like saying like, well, the Holocaust is totally understandable because Hitler wrote that he didn't like Jews in the book, and he was just
What did you
doing what he would.
expect?
What did you
Yeah.
expect? It's like, what did you expect? It's like, lots of things have rationales for them, and that and can be explained. It doesn't mean they're like good things or bad things. Why do I care that a right-wing regime in Russia feels threatened by why do I care? Why is that an issue to me? Right? Just as the same reason, why do I care that America felt threatened by missiles in Cuba? I don't care about that, right? It's probably rational. There's an explanation for it, why they would feel that you can empathize with it and understand it. Doesn't mean you have to like agree with it or sign on to it. So people, I think, lots of people are like mixing up analysis of a situation with like a normative argument of what should be. Yeah, we can say like
Yeah,
X, Y, and Z,
normal.
X, Y, and Z happened for these reasons, but that doesn't mean we agree with the rationale everybody had for doing what they did. We're just trying to understand it as opposed to like sign off. And we don't. If you're on the left, do we have even a dog in the fight? We don't have any influence. So like, why do we need to pick a side? Like, honestly.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, I'm not necessarily definitely leftist. I don't know, but yeah, it's just when you don't have power, I don't see the need to take a. Yeah, I definitely am with Putin or Trump or whoever. It's like all of these people are awful.
They're awful people.
Yeah. But yeah, thank you so much. But I don't know if you have time for the last question. It was about pop culture. I saw you. Anything caught your eye in movies,
In
books,
pop
TV
culture,
shows?
have I watched anything? Well, if for a book, I would recommend The Three Body Problem.
Oh,
It's a Chinese book translated to English, a trilogy. It's a pretty interesting science fiction book. What else would I recommend? Um, I haven't watched much television recently, so
did
I
you
did
watch
watch. Yeah, go ahead.
Mandalorian season 3?
I did watch The Mandalorian season 3. It
How was
was
it? I haven't
okay.
seen it.
It was okay. It was fine. It was uh I mean, The Mandalorian is fine. It's good watching TV. It's nothing mind blowing. I like it. They fly around in their little jetpacks and they have the baby Yoda. You know, it's something worth watching. But season 3 does it was could have
I heard
been.
it's not as good. That's what I
Yeah.
mean. I liked it because it was a bit separate from the whole canon.
So, well, the one that I really liked is the Andor
Oh,
series.
that was amazing. That was
That
really
was a
good.
good. That was a
I
good
was
series.
watching that during protest in Iran, so it was really hitting the
You were
spot.
getting psyched up for it, huh? You
Yeah,
were getting
yeah.
ready for
The
everything.
protest. Yeah.
Uh,
But yeah, so you
uh,
enjoyed Andor.
yeah, I did enjoy Andor, so I would definitely recommend Andor to people if they haven't seen it. And that's probably the only thing that I've really been impressed with lately. I watched this Iranian TV series
Who's
a
the
bit with.
Sheikh?
No, what was it? I can't remember what it was called. It was about some officer in Gilan during the
Oh,
Soviet
my home.
occupation, and like it's typical Iranian thing. There's a wife, she's pregnant, the baby dies, they cry for 3 hours on the TV, that kind of thing. But they had like nice costumes and things like that. It was a pretty good one. They've upped the quality of the Iranian TV series, I think.
Oh yeah, the home media thing is they're allowed to go a bit more loose with the hijab. So
I know they have some loose hijabs on there and
yeah,
some.
they're
Yeah, I
very.
think they're gonna have to give up on the hijab to stay in power. They're gonna be like, look,
I think they want to. It's just there is this very small fraction that they can't deal with. They don't know what to do with. I think because
I think
they basically backed off of that. But
it's because like policing people with the hijab has been like such a core identity of the Islamic Republic. Like one of the things it does. Like if you
and
don't do it anymore,
it's
what's even
really
the point?
it's Reza Pahlavi's Reza Shah's fault because he has started this whole, unveiling and now veiling and
then making people wear silly hats all the time.
oh, that too, yeah. Yeah, that
I
was
mean,
part of it.
that's what is it with these Middle Eastern leaders and their hats? It's like you have to wear this hat and have to wear that hat. And Reza, honestly, Reza Shah was I remember listening to a lecture from an Iranian historian who basically said that Reza Shah got captured by Mustafa Kemal on a train, and then he came back to Iran and he's like, "We're going to do what Mustafa Kemal does, but we're going to do it better, faster, cooler hats, more unveiling." Right?
That's the general consensus in Iranian historiography that I mean, I give him a tiny bit more credit because he didn't commit a genocide, so that's nice. But he killed a lot of people, but he didn't do it based on racial base.
No,
Equal
he did a little bit
murder.
Yeah, he did a lot of thuggery, just like general thuggery.
Yeah, it was more like a Stalin than Hitler in that.
Yeah,
sense.
he was very he just didn't like people who didn't listen to him, right?
Yeah, which is, I think, again, fair. I think that's fair enough. I think that's
very. And he wanted to be a president, but they made him be a shah.
Yeah, that's one of the another. Yeah, he's one of his mistakes. One of his biggest. I think.
And then he had his son, who was the most useless person in the world.
He was a nice man. He was a very nice man. He was just too sweet to be a shah, I feel.
He was too stupid because I mean, like, in 1970, when you have an opportunity to democratize, what do? Like a whole big party.
He democratized too. I don't know. I feel like the whole land reform, he went too fast, too quickly. Although I don't know.
That's what happens. Well, the land reform was highly inefficient. That was the problem.
Yeah, and he bought up all the land, so that.
Yeah, exactly. It's like don't be too sympathetic for the Shah, because remember, he's the reason you have Islamic Republic.
Yes, I know. He was just at least he was. You have no idea because we've been dealing with people who can't even talk it like, straight as. I mean, Turkey is not as bad. I don't think the politicians are slightly better. In Islamic Republic, they can't even string two sentences together. So it does make you nostalgic.
They're too busy. They're too busy praying.
Sure, of course. But by the way, I heard one time you were a fan of Nader Shah. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think Nader Shah is pretty funny. He's definitely my favorite Iranian Shah. Basically, because there's a book by Michael Axworthy about him.
Yeah.
And there's a really funny story when he loots the Mughal Empire, but he makes the Mughal emperor do taruf with him. So he's like, please, the Mughal emperor's like, please take my treasure and my gold. And he's like, no, my friend, I would. And he insists. And eventually he goes, well, if you insist, I'll take all of your treasures. 3 times, exactly. 3 times. 3 times a charm, exactly. So yeah, so that Nader Shah has, and also the other my favorite story was he got sick of the Europeans, so he basically had his slaves,
murder them all.
No, do a sexual assault on them.
Oh, buggery, is that what he did?
Yeah,
nice.
They did. That's what he did to the imperialists. He had them. He was also psycho. There's another story.
Oh, he was definitely. That book, by the way, that was one of the first historical books I read. Michael Axford's thing. It's just always a favorite of our family.
Yeah, it's a good read. It's a fun book about Nader Shah and his slow descent into madness.
Yes, and murdering everybody. And
blinding everybody. Like one of his friends, he'd said, I'll never kill you. And then he said, okay, I promised I'd never kill you. I'm just going to cut your eyes out and rape your wife. How about that?
Jesus. Oh, wow. Okay.
He didn't, that's how these people rolled. That's feudalism for you.
Yeah, it was good times. No American imperialism.
No American imperialism back then.
In Middle East. It was just good old Turkish imperialism. So It's good offline.
Exactly.
But thank you so much for giving us your time, and I
Thank you
think we
so much for
went a
inviting me.
half an hour, even a bit over. And yeah, thanks for input and everything. Do you want to add anything or?
Well, yeah, if anybody wants to check out This Is Revolution, a podcast, please do come and visit our podcast and give us a like and subscribe. We're always adding new shows. So yeah, that's probably what I would say. And yeah, thank you so much for hosting me. And I wish your channel all the success, and may it grow and be fruitful.
Thank you so much. Very, very polite and Persian of you too.